I had exactly $14,630 in my checking account when my stepsister married my husband and started calling his $380,000 company ours. I was still tender from surgery, walking slow in compression socks, when a courier found me in my building lobby and handed me a small padded envelope. No return address, just my name in block letters. Inside was a USB drive and a single sticky note. Don't open this at home, bring it to a lawyer. 3 days later, my husband collapsed in his office and never woke up. At the funeral, my stepsister sat in the front row in pearls and certainty. She kept one hand on the widow's bouquet and the other on the future she thought she'd stolen. She didn't know my husband had built something stronger than money, an irrevocable trust with a canary clause that turned greed into a paper trail. Let me take you back. I'm Lila Mercer. I'm 36. I work as a patient advocate at a children's hospital in Seattle, the kind of job that teaches you to speak softly while you're holding the line against chaos. My realistic flaw is that I avoid confrontation until it's too late, because growing up, confrontation never led anywhere good. Seattle suits me. The city is gray in a way that feels honest. Rain doesn't pretend to be anything else. It falls, it passes, and the streets keep moving. My stepsister, Brielle, always believed weather should be curated. We didn't share blood. We shared a house, briefly, after my dad married her mom when I was 14. Even then, Brielle arrived like she owned the air. She had shiny hair and quick smiles, and a talent for turning adults into mirrors. She'd say something lightly cruel, and if I reacted, I was sensitive. If I didn't, she'd say I was cold. Our parents loved peace. Brielle loved winning. I learned early that if you wanted to survive, you became invisible. There were 2 moments that defined our childhood dynamic, the kind you don't forget even when you try. The first was a charity banquet my stepmom dragged us to when I was 16. It was at a downtown hotel ballroom that smelled like perfume and roasted chicken. Brielle had begged for a dress that cost more than my dad's monthly truck payment. I wore a borrowed black skirt and a blouse I ironed myself. At the table, an older woman asked what school we went to. Brielle leaned in, bright as a commercial. I'm at Lakeside Prep. Lila goes to Roosevelt. She's more low-key. I still remember the way she said low-key, like it was a diagnosis. The woman nodded politely. And what do you want to do, Lila? Before I could answer, my stepmom laughed, light, dismissive. Oh, Lila's our quiet one. Brielle's the ambitious one. Not you're both different. Not you're both good. Just a line drawn in frosting. I smiled because that's what you do when you're trying not to make your dad uncomfortable. Under the table, my nails dug crescents into my palm until they hurt. The second moment came years later, after college, when I was 25 and finally had my own tiny studio apartment with a view of an alley and a sense of freedom that felt like oxygen. My dad called me. He sounded tired. Brielle needs a place to stay for a while, he said, just until she gets on her feet. Brielle had a marketing degree and a habit of calling jobs beneath her. She also had credit card debt she pretended was temporary. I said no. It was the first time I ever said no out loud, to my family, without adding an apology at the end. There was a long silence. Then my dad sighed, the same weary sound I'd heard since I was a kid. Why can't you just be more flexible? Flexible. That was code for make it easy for us. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at my own little kitchen, my chipped mug, my secondhand couch. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'm not doing this, I said, and my voice shook, and I hated that it shook. I love you, Dad, but I'm not. Brielle didn't move in. She didn't forgive me either. She carried that no like a bruise she wanted to show off. When I met Graham Vale, I was 31 and finally content. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He had the kind of calm that makes you realize how loud your past has been. Graham was a founder, one of those tech people who could talk to a room full of investors and then go quiet in a bookstore like it was a church. His company built enterprise security systems, the unglamorous backbone that kept other people's money safe. He'd sold a majority stake years earlier and kept a sizable share. On paper, it made him worth hundreds of millions. I didn't know that when we met. We met because I spilled tea on his laptop at a hospital fundraiser. It was a smaller event, the kind where the donation totals mattered more than the photos. I was working the silent auction table, and he stepped forward to bid on a weekend cabin package. My elbow caught my cup, the lid popped, and tea slid across the table like it had somewhere urgent to be. I froze, mortified. Graham didn't raise his voice. He didn't do that tight-lipped thing wealthy men sometimes do, like your mistake is an inconvenience to their dignity. He just lifted his laptop, angled it away from the tea, and smiled like the whole moment was human. "It's okay," he said. "It was a long week. My computer probably needed a bath." I laughed because he offered me something I wasn't expecting, permission to breathe. He asked my name, not my title, not my connection, my name. When I told him I worked with families navigating medical bills and insurance disputes, he listened like I was describing a world he actually wanted to understand. "People underestimate how much paperwork can break someone," he said quietly. It wasn't a line, it was recognition. We dated slowly. I learned his rhythms, morning black coffee, nightly walks even in drizzle, how he paused before answering a question that mattered. He learned mine, my habit of apologizing for taking up space, my fear of asking for what I needed, the way I flinched when someone got disappointed. He never mocked it. He never fixed me. He just stayed. 2 years later, he proposed in our kitchen, barefoot, after we'd burned a tray of cookies and decided to eat the imperfect ones first. "I don't want perfect," he said. "I want real. I want you." I said yes, and for the first time in my life, yes felt like a door opening instead of a cage closing. We got married at a small venue on Bainbridge Island, the kind with string lights and wood beams and salt air. My dad came, my stepmom came. Brielle came in a pale dress that was just one shade away from white, like she wanted the camera to argue with itself. At the reception, Brielle raised her glass. "To Lila," she said, smiling too brightly. "May you finally get the life you wanted." It sounded like a compliment if you didn't know her. Graham squeezed my hand under the table. He'd noticed. He always noticed. But he didn't make a scene. He met my eyes and gave me a small nod that said, "I'm here. I see you. You're safe." For a while, we were. Our life wasn't a montage. It was grocery lists and mismatched socks and late-night conversations about which of us forgot to pay the water bill. Graham's world had money in it, sure, but our day-to-day felt normal. We lived in a restored Craftsman in Queen Anne with squeaky floors and a backyard we kept promising to landscape next spring. I stayed at the hospital. He stayed on the board of his company, consulted occasionally, and spent most of his time building something quieter, a foundation that funded pediatric mental health programs. He did it without press, without galas. He hated being praised for doing what felt obvious to him. "Money is loud," he told me once. "I prefer results." Brielle, on the other hand, loved loud. After my wedding, she called more often. It wasn't affection, it was interest. She asked questions that pretended to be casual. "So, what does Graham do exactly? Does he own the house, or does he have, family money?" I learned to answer in fog. "Oh, he's in cybersecurity. We bought the house together. He works hard." Brielle always pressed for numbers. She always wanted the sharp edges. One afternoon, my stepmom called me and said, "Brielle's had a tough year. She's trying to reset." That was my stepmom's favorite phrase, reset. It meant Brielle had burned down something and wanted someone else to hand her matches for the next fire. "She's coming to Seattle," my stepmom said. "Maybe you can help her network." I didn't want to. The truth is, I didn't want Brielle in my orbit at all. But my flaw, my soft underbelly, was that I still feared being the difficult one. So I said, "Sure, maybe coffee." Brielle arrived like she always did. Expensive boots, bright lipstick, the energy of someone who believed rules were for other people. At coffee, she didn't ask about my job. She didn't ask about my patients. She asked where Graham's office was, what events he attended, whether he was still close to the CEO. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice like we were sharing secrets. "Lila, don't be weird about it," she said. "I just want to make sure you're protected. Men like that, they have options." I stared at her. "Graham isn't like that." Brielle's smile twitched. "You always say that until they prove you wrong." She said it softly, like kindness. But it landed like a curse. A week later, I had surgery. Nothing dramatic. A chronic issue I'd ignored too long because I was good at working through discomfort. It was outpatient, but the recovery was longer than I expected. I moved slowly. I slept more. My world shrank to blankets, medication reminders, and the soft clink of Graham's mug as he made tea. Brielle texted daily. "How are you? Need anything? I can stop by." I told her no. I kept telling her no. And then one afternoon, Graham said, "She already came by." My heart did a small, stupid stutter. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "She dropped off flowers," he said, "and soup. She stayed 10 minutes. I didn't like it, but I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself my discomfort was old trauma, not current danger. That was my mistake. Over the next month, Graham changed, subtly at first. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't distant in the obvious way. It was more like he was preoccupied. His phone stayed face down more often. He took calls outside. He started meeting with attorneys about the foundation. But when I asked which one, he'd say, "Just someone the board recommended." Then one evening, I heard Brielle's laugh in our hallway. It was a bright sound, confident, too comfortable in my house. I stood in the kitchen doorway in sweatpants and a soft cardigan, still tender from recovery, and watched my stepsister walk in like she belonged there. Graham followed behind her, carrying a box of documents. Brielle looked at me, smiled wide, and said, "Oh good, you're up." Something in me went cold. "What is this?" I asked. Graham set the box on the table like it weighed too much. He didn't meet my eyes. "Lila," he said quietly, "we need to talk. There are sentences you hear once and your body remembers them forever." My throat tightened. "Okay." He took a breath, slow. "I've made a decision. I'm filing for divorce." I didn't understand the words. I understood the shape of them, the way they pushed air out of the room. I heard myself say, "Why?" Graham's jaw tightened. "It's complicated." Brielle made a small sound of sympathy that was almost a laugh. "I told him you wouldn't take it well," she said, like I was a child who'd been denied candy. I looked at Graham. "Is this because of her?" He finally met my eyes, and there was something there. Pain, yes, but also determination. Like he was forcing himself to do something awful because he believed it had to be done. "Don't," he said softly. "Please don't do this here." "Do what?" My voice cracked. "Ask why my husband is ending our marriage with my stepsister standing in my kitchen?" Brielle stepped closer, just a little. She always liked taking space. "Lila," she said, sweet as poison, "you've been on borrowed time. You're delicate. He needs someone who can match his life." I waited for Graham to contradict her, to defend me, to say that's not true. He didn't. He just said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't theatrical. It was worse. It was quiet and final. The divorce moved fast. Graham's attorney sent documents through an escrow service to ensure everything was properly delivered. I learned new terms I never wanted to learn. Marital settlement agreement, equitable distribution, non-disparagement clause. His lawyer suggested mediation. I couldn't even imagine sitting in a room with Brielle nearby, so I signed what I could, asked for what my own attorney called reasonable protections, and tried to survive. The settlement was strangely generous. Graham transferred a large portion of our liquid savings to me and agreed that I'd keep the house, temporarily, until it sold, with proceeds split in a way that favored me. My attorney, a calm woman named Teresa Kwan, frowned when she reviewed it. "This is unusual," she said, tapping the page. "He's giving you more than he needs to." "Guilt," I whispered. Teresa studied me. Maybe, or maybe strategy. I didn't have the energy to entertain mystery. I was in grief. The kind of grief that starts before someone dies, when something you trusted evaporates and you're left holding air. 2 weeks after the divorce finalized, Brielle posted photos online. She and Graham, dressed up, at a rooftop event. Champagne, city lights, a caption that said, "When life finally aligns." I deleted my accounts. I stopped going to friends' dinners. I walked through work like a ghost, smiling for families who needed steadiness, then crying in my car afterward where no one could see me. Then came the clock trigger. On a Tuesday afternoon, Teresa called me. "Lila," she said, and her voice had shifted into something sharper, more urgent. "I need you to listen carefully." My stomach dropped. "Okay." "I received a notice from King County Superior Court," she said. "It's a probate-related filing connected to Graham Vale. There's a hearing scheduled, and your name is mentioned." My hand tightened around my phone. "Why would my name be mentioned?" Teresa paused. "Because someone filed paperwork indicating you may have a claim or an obligation. I don't know which yet." "I don't understand," I said. My voice sounded far away. Teresa's tone turned firm, the way it does when someone is trying to hand you a life raft. "The hearing is in 10 days. If you miss this, you lose everything." The words landed like a gavel. "If I miss this, I lose everything," I repeated. "Yes," Teresa said. "And Lila, do not contact Brielle. Do not respond to any messages. Let's handle this correctly." After we hung up, I put the phone face down on the counter and stared at my hands until my vision blurred. 10 days. I didn't know it then, but those 10 days were the last quiet stretch before everything ruptured. 2 days later, I was leaving my building when a courier approached me in the lobby. "Lila Mercer?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a small padded envelope and asked for a signature. No return address, no logo, just my name. Inside was the USB drive and the sticky note. "Don't open this at home. Bring it to a lawyer." I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I brought it to Teresa's office. Teresa plugged it into a clean laptop that wasn't connected to the internet, something she called air-gapped, a security habit she'd picked up from corporate clients. She opened the drive and frowned. "There are folders," she said, "and one of them is labeled Read First." I swallowed. "Open it." Teresa clicked. A single video file appeared, and beneath it, a PDF labeled Affidavit, Draft. The video was short, grainy, clearly recorded on a phone. Graham was in frame, sitting at what looked like his home office, except it wasn't our home office. Different bookshelf, different light. His face looked thinner, his skin slightly gray. His voice was calm, but there was strain beneath it. "If you're watching this," he said, "it means I didn't get the timing right." Teresa and I stared at the screen. Graham continued. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." My breath caught. That sentence didn't sound like him, not the way he usually talked, but it sounded like something he'd say if he needed to hold on to control. He looked into the camera like he was looking at me. "Lila," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I need you to trust one more thing I did, even though it hurt you." I covered my mouth with my hand. Teresa paused the video. "Do you want to watch the rest now?" I nodded, once. Teresa hit play. Graham explained, in careful, measured language, that he had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition months earlier, one that carried a high risk of sudden death. He spoke about estate planning in a way that made my stomach twist. My shares, my foundation funds, the remainder interest in my holdings, he said. They're tied to structures most people never see. He mentioned an irrevocable trust, something called the Vale Family Trust, and a set of triggers designed to protect beneficiaries from fraud. Then he said Brielle's name. She believes I'm a shortcut, he said. She believes she can marry into control. She cannot. His eyes flicked away from the camera for a second, like he was forcing himself not to break. I needed to move Lila out of the blast radius, he said. So I made myself the villain. I made her free. I felt like my chest was being compressed from the inside. Graham took a slow breath. The file labeled second folder contains the proof. Teresa Kwan will know what to do. Follow her advice. Teresa's jaw tightened, startled to hear her own name. Graham looked back into the camera. And Lila, I know this will hurt, but it will end clean. That's the point. The video ended. The room stayed silent. Teresa didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "We need to open the PDF." The affidavit draft was written in legal language, but Teresa translated as she read. "It's a sworn statement," she said, "intended to be notarized. It lays out that Graham intentionally structured the divorce settlement to remove you from future liabilities tied to his business interests and family holdings." "Liabilities?" I whispered. Teresa nodded. "He's saying explicitly that there are debts or obligations connected to his estate that someone is about to inherit." My mind flashed to Brielle's champagne photos, to her smile, to the way she'd said, "He needs someone who can match his life." Teresa scrolled. "There's more," she said, and her voice sharpened. "He references a fraud carve-out clause in the trust." "What is that?" I asked. "It's a provision that says if someone obtains a benefit through fraud or deception, they're disqualified," Teresa said. "And it allows the trustee to take action, asset freezes, clawbacks, court petitions." My stomach turned. "So, he planned for this?" Teresa's eyes narrowed. "Yes, and he left us breadcrumbs." She clicked into another folder. It contained emails, screenshots, a scanned document that looked like a deed, and a file labeled METADATA. Teresa leaned back. "Okay," she said softly. "This is real." I stared at her. "What do you mean, real?" She pointed to a document on the screen. A property deed for a small commercial building in South Lake Union, one registered to an LLC named BVA Holdings. BVA. I felt cold. "Brielle Vale," I whispered. Teresa clicked into the metadata file. It showed document history, creation dates, edits, user accounts. "This," Teresa said, tapping the screen, "is what people forget exists." She opened a PDF of what looked like a marital amendment, something about ownership transfers. It was signed electronically. Teresa zoomed in. "This is a DOCUSIGN signature," she said. "And here, see this? The certificate of completion." She clicked. "The IP address used to sign this is not from Graham's office." She looked at me. "Lila, this was signed from a device in your building. At a time you were under anesthesia." My mouth went dry. I heard myself say, "That's impossible." Teresa's tone turned grave. "No, it's very possible. Someone had access to your home network or your devices, or to Graham's." I remembered Brielle's texts, her offers to stop by, Graham saying she'd already visited. Flowers and soup. 10 minutes. 10 minutes was plenty of time to pick up a laptop, to photograph a password, to connect a phone to a Wi-Fi network that saved itself automatically. Teresa clicked open an email thread. Brielle had emailed Graham from a private address, not her usual one. The subject line read, "Simple fix." The tone was familiar, manipulative. She'd framed it like help. "You need protection, Graham. Lila isn't stable. I can handle the admin. Just sign what I send. I'll take care of everything." Teresa's eyes were flinty. "This is coercion," she said. "And if that deed transfer is fraudulent, if she forged access while you were incapacitated, this becomes a court matter." I swallowed. "But why would she transfer property into an LLC?" Teresa inhaled slowly. "Because LLCs are shields. People use them to hide ownership, move assets, and sometimes bury liabilities." She pulled up another document, a loan agreement. My eyes blurred on the numbers until Teresa tapped the relevant line. Personal guarantee, she said. Graham signed a guarantee on behalf of BVA Holdings, likely under the assumption it was for foundation operations. If Brielle got that entity tied to him through marriage or through trust claims, she gets the property and the debt. How much? I whispered. Teresa traced the amount with her finger. $6.4 million. My stomach dropped. And then she opened another file. A letter from a bank about an escrow dispute. Funds held, pending verification of ownership. Teresa's mouth tightened. This is why the probate hearing exists, she said. Someone is trying to claim assets before the trustee can intervene. I stared at the screen, dizzy. Teresa clicked into the folder labeled Second Folder. Inside were two things, security footage stills and a short audio clip. Teresa's eyes flicked to me. Are you ready? I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. The security footage stills were from my building's lobby camera. Time-stamped. Brielle, in heels, carrying a tote bag, walking toward the elevator. Date, the day of my surgery. Time, 20 minutes after I'd been wheeled into the operating room. My throat tightened until it hurt. Teresa opened the audio clip. Brielle's voice filled the office. I don't care if she's asleep, Brielle said, sharp and impatient. I need access. You told me the passcode was the same as the Wi-Fi. A man's voice responded, low. I'm not comfortable with this. Brielle laughed once, cold. Comfort is for people who don't want money. Do you want your invoice paid or not? I stared at Teresa. Who is that man? Teresa didn't answer right away. She clicked open a final file, a contact sheet with a name. Evan Rourke, she read. Private IT contractor. I felt nauseous. Teresa exhaled. We can subpoena him, and we can use this to request an emergency injunction at the probate hearing. Against Brielle? I asked. Against any premature transfers, Teresa corrected. We're not going to threaten, we're going to file. I nodded because it was the only thing I could do. That afternoon, Teresa filed motions. She explained each step like she was building a staircase out of legal language. We'll petition the court for an asset freeze on any disputed properties tied to BVA Holdings, she said. We'll submit an affidavit, sworn, notarized, attaching the metadata evidence. We'll notify the trustee of the irrevocable trust because the trustee has standing to intervene. And the canary clause? I asked, remembering the phrase from Graham's video. Teresa's eyes sharpened. A canary clause is designed to alert a trustee that someone is challenging the trust or acting in bad faith, she said. It's like a legal tripwire. If Brielle tries to contest or manipulate the trust, she triggers penalties, sometimes full disinheritance, sometimes immediate removal as beneficiary. I swallowed hard. So if she files something? She already has, Teresa said quietly. The probate notice is her move. My phone buzzed while Teresa was speaking. Brielle. I stared at the screen until it stopped. Then it buzzed again. Another call. Another. I didn't answer. I didn't block her. Teresa told me not to. Let her leave messages, she said. Sometimes people convict themselves when they think they're in control. That night, Brielle left a voicemail. Her voice was shaky, annoyed, confused. Lila, she said, this is ridiculous. People are saying there are liens, lions like I bought a junk car. Graham was wealthy. This is a mistake. Call me back. I listened once, then forwarded it to Teresa. 2 days later, Graham died. It was on a Friday. The news came through Teresa, not Brielle. Lila, Teresa said, and her voice was softer now, layered with something like respect. I'm so sorry. I sat down on my couch and stared at my hands. I didn't know how to mourn a man who had left me on purpose to save me. I didn't know if grief had rules for that. The funeral was held at a large downtown church, the kind with marble columns and polished wood. It was full, board members, foundation staff, people in suits who spoke in low voices and held their condolences like business cards. Brielle was there, of course. She wore black and diamonds. She held Graham's mother's hand like she'd earned the right. She cried into a silk handkerchief and accepted sympathy with a practiced tilt of the chin. I sat in the back. I didn't want her to see me. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of making my grief part of her performance. After the service, Brielle stepped outside and spoke to a cluster of people near the steps. I heard her voice carry. "As his wife," she said, loud enough for the wind to deliver it, "I'll make sure his legacy is protected." Teresa, standing beside me, didn't react. She just murmured, "Let her talk." Then she added, "Probate hearing is Monday." The weekend passed in a blur of paperwork and silence. Teresa prepared filings. I signed declarations. She walked me through what would happen in court. "This is not like TV," she said. "It's procedural. It's quiet, but it's powerful." On Monday morning, King County Superior Court felt like every courthouse I'd ever seen in movies, except colder, more fluorescent, more ordinary. The kind of place where people's lives were changed by stamps and file numbers. Brielle arrived with 2 attorneys and a posture that said she assumed the room belonged to her. When she saw me, her eyes widened briefly, surprise, then irritation. She walked over, stopping a few feet away. "Of course you're here," she said softly, too sweet. "Trying to grab what you can." Teresa stepped slightly in front of me, not aggressively, just firmly. "This isn't a conversation," Teresa said. Brielle's smile tightened. "Oh, honey, you hired someone." Teresa didn't blink. "We'll speak through filings." Brielle turned her gaze to me, her voice lowering. "You always needed someone to speak for you, Lila," she said. "That's why he left." My flaw, avoidance, rose in me like old instinct, the urge to disappear, to let her words land and move on. But I heard Graham's voice in my head. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." I looked at Brielle and said quietly, "You're going to learn what documents remember." Her eyes narrowed, confused, and for the first time, I saw something like uncertainty flicker behind her confidence. Court began. The judge was a woman with silver hair and a patient expression that made it clear she'd seen every flavor of entitlement and wasn't impressed by any of them. The clerk called the case. The attorneys stood. Brielle's lead attorney began with polished certainty. "Your Honor, my client is the surviving spouse of Graham Vale," he said. "She is entitled to—" Teresa rose. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we're here because a fraudulent transfer and a bad faith trust challenge are in progress. We're requesting immediate injunctive relief, including an asset freeze on disputed property." Brielle's attorney scoffed lightly. "There is no fraud." Teresa didn't argue. She handed the court clerk a binder. "Exhibit A," she said, "includes metadata evidence from executed documents signed during Ms. Mercer's surgical procedure, along with security footage placing Ms. Vale at Ms. Mercer's building during that time." The judge's expression shifted, subtle but real. "Exhibit B includes an affidavit," Teresa continued, "to be notarized today, along with documentation supporting a fraud carve-out clause in the Vale Family Trust, which triggers trustee intervention." Brielle turned her head slowly toward her attorney, whispering something sharp. Her attorney's confidence wavered as he flipped through the binder. The judge looked up. "Ms. Vale," she said, voice steady, "are you contesting the trust?" Brielle's attorney stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client merely seeks clarity." The judge held up a hand. "Yes or no?" Brielle's lips parted. Her eyes darted. She didn't want to answer. Answering meant committing. Finally, she said, "I'm his wife. I deserve to know what's mine." The judge nodded once, like she'd been waiting for exactly that. Teresa spoke again, measured. "Your Honor, the trust contains a CANARY clause," she said. "It's designed to detect and penalize bad faith challenges. The moment Ms. Vale filed her petition to compel distributions, she triggered that clause." The courtroom didn't gasp. Real courtrooms don't do that. But something did happen. The air changed. Brielle frowned. "What does that mean?" she snapped, forgetting decorum for half a second. The judge's voice stayed calm. "It means," she said, "that if the clause is valid and properly executed, the trustee may have the authority to suspend or deny your claim pending investigation." Brielle's attorney leaned toward her, whispering rapidly now, his face pale. Brielle's confidence cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Then the trustee's attorney stood, a man in a plain suit, no drama, just facts. "Your Honor," he said, "I represent the trustee of the Vale Family Trust. Upon receiving Ms. Kwan's filings, we reviewed the trust instrument and confirmed the presence of the Canary Clause and fraud carve-out provisions. We request permission to intervene and to place a temporary hold on all distributions and contested assets." Brielle stared, stunned. "No," she said softly. "No, that's not—" The judge looked at Teresa. "Ms. Kwan, you mentioned security footage." Teresa nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We also have audio evidence identifying an IT contractor who assisted Ms. Vale in accessing devices during Ms. Mercer's medical procedure. We intend to subpoena him." Brielle's face went white. She spun toward me, eyes sharp with sudden fear. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. Teresa did. "We filed," she said. "That's all." Brielle's attorney tried to regain ground. "Your Honor, this is speculative. The alleged metadata—" The judge cut him off. Not harshly, just decisively. "The court takes allegations of fraudulent transfer seriously," she said, "especially where trusts and large assets are involved. I am granting a temporary restraining order on any asset movement connected to BVA Holdings and any related entities pending investigation." Brielle blinked, confused. "Restraining order?" she echoed, like she'd never imagined a judge could say no to her. The judge clarified. "Not a personal restraining order," she said. "An order restricting transactions, an asset freeze." Brielle's mouth opened, then closed. Then Teresa delivered the part that felt like a door locking. "Additionally, Your Honor," Teresa said, "we request the court note that Ms. Mercer is not a party to these liabilities due to the finalized divorce and the settlement terms structured to sever future obligations." The judge nodded. "Noted." Brielle's shoulders rose and fell once, sharp. She turned toward her attorney. Tell them, this is wrong. Graham wouldn't—" And that's when the trustee's attorney opened his folder and read a line quietly into the record. "A letter of instruction from Mr. Vale," he said, "dated 6 months prior. It states that any attempt by Brielle Vale, née Brielle Hart, to compel distributions or transfer ownership outside of trustee oversight should be treated as a hostile action and investigated for fraud." Brielle froze. The courtroom went silent. Not because someone demanded it, because everyone, for the first time, understood the shape of what Graham had done. He had anticipated her. He had documented her. He had built a system that didn't require anyone to shout. Brielle stood there, breath shallow, eyes darting like she was looking for an exit that wasn't there. Her attorney leaned in. "Brielle," he whispered, "you need to stop talking." But Brielle couldn't stop. "This is Lila," she said suddenly, voice rising. "This is her. She's always been jealous. She did this." Teresa didn't react. The judge did. "Ms. Vale," the judge said, sharper now, "one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." Brielle's face flushed, then drained. She sank back into her seat like her bones had turned to water. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway, Brielle tried one more time. She pushed toward me, her eyes wild. "Give me the files," she hissed. "Whatever he left you, give it to me. This is a mistake. I can fix it. We can—" Teresa stepped between us again. "No," Teresa said, calm as steel. Brielle's voice trembled. "I'm his wife." Teresa's expression didn't change. "You're a subject of an investigation." Brielle's lips parted. Then she did something that surprised me. She looked small, not sorry, not remorseful, just suddenly aware that the world wasn't going to bend. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down at it. Whatever she saw drained the last color from her face. "Who is Evan Rourke?" I asked quietly, because I already knew. Brielle's eyes flicked up, terrified now. I don't know what you're talking about. Teresa answered, voice even. He's the contractor you pressured. He received a subpoena this morning. He also reached out to us. Brielle blinked rapidly. He won't. Teresa's gaze was steady. He already did. That was the ally twist I hadn't expected. Evan Rourke wasn't some loyal henchman. He wasn't Brielle's partner. He was a man who'd been pushed, paid, and then left holding the risk when things went wrong. Teresa later told me Evan contacted her because he'd recognized her name from Graham's video file. He'd watched it after receiving the USB drive copy that Graham had apparently mailed him too, a quiet insurance policy. Evan didn't do it out of kindness. He did it because he didn't want to be the fall guy. But in the end, truth doesn't require pure motives. It only requires proof. Over the next month, the case unfolded the way legal cases do, slowly, relentlessly, through documents. Evan signed a notarized affidavit stating Brielle had instructed him to gain access to Graham's laptop and to assist with signature completion while I was in surgery. He provided invoices, payment records, text messages. Teresa hired a forensic consultant to verify the digital trail. A forensic audit confirmed the DOCUSIGN signatures were executed from a device linked to Brielle's phone hotspot. Metadata doesn't care how pretty your smile is. The trustee petitioned for sanctions under the trust's fraud provisions. Brielle's attempt to force distributions became the very thing that disqualified her. Meanwhile, the debt tied to BVA holdings, those personal guarantees and the commercial loan, didn't disappear. It sat there like gravity. And gravity is patient. Brielle tried damage control. She switched attorneys. She attempted to argue she'd been misled, that Graham had promised her the company's shares, that she'd acted in good faith. The judge didn't yell. She didn't shame. She simply asked for evidence. Brielle had none, because Brielle's whole life was built on vibe and entitlement, not paper. The final hearing wasn't dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was more devastating than drama. The judge read the findings, summarized the verified fraud indicators, and upheld the trust provisions. Brielle was removed as a beneficiary. All claims she'd filed were dismissed. The asset freeze stayed in place until the trustee and creditors resolved the remaining liabilities. Brielle walked out of court with nothing but her wedding ring and a stack of legal bills. And then the other shoe dropped. Creditors don't care about your heartbreak. They care about signatures. Brielle had signed documents too, spouse acknowledgments, financial disclosures, an attempt to step into administrative control that, in doing so, tied her to liabilities she hadn't understood. Teresa explained it to me later, sitting across from me in her office, while rain traced slow lines down the window. Brielle tried to grab the steering wheel, Teresa said, and by doing that, she put her name on the wrong side of the ledger. What happens to her? I asked. Teresa didn't smile. She wasn't there for cruelty. She'll negotiate, Teresa said. She may declare bankruptcy. She'll deal with creditors. It's not prison. It's consequences. Consequences. That word felt heavier than revenge, more adult, more real. Graham had never wanted Brielle harmed. He'd wanted her contained, exposed, separated from me like a toxin sealed in glass. One afternoon, weeks after the final ruling, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Graham's foundation, a simple note. The board voted unanimously to name a pediatric mental health grant after him. They asked if I would speak at the announcement. Small, private, no press. I didn't want a stage. I didn't want applause. But I wanted to honor him the right way, so I said yes. At the event, I stood in a quiet hospital conference room with a handful of staff members and a few families who'd been helped by the programs Graham funded. No champagne, no photographers, just people with tired eyes and real gratitude. I said, Graham believed paperwork should protect the vulnerable, not bury them. He built systems that quietly held people up. Then I paused because my throat tightened. And he taught me, I added softly, that love isn't always loud. Sometimes love is a plan. Sometimes love is a document. Sometimes love is the decision to make sure the person you care about can breathe even after you're gone. Afterward, I went outside and stood under the covered walkway while rain fell beyond the awning. I didn't feel closure like a movie ending. I felt something smaller, stability. 1 year later, my life looks different, but it looks honest. I moved out of the Craftsman house, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to live inside a museum of before. I bought a smaller place in West Seattle with a little sunroom and a backyard that actually grows things when you try. I planted rosemary, tomatoes, lavender. My hands get dirty. My mind gets quiet. I still work at the hospital. I'm better at setting boundaries now. I say no without rehearsing it for hours first. I don't answer calls that spike my cortisol. I don't keep relationships alive out of guilt. I haven't heard from Brielle directly. Once, months ago, I saw her name in a public filing, an address change connected to a bankruptcy petition. Just a line on paper. No drama, no captions, no rooftop photos. I felt something surprising. Not triumph, not pity, just distance. And distance, I've learned, can be mercy. Graham's USB drive is in a small wooden box in my closet. I don't open it often. I don't need to. The proof did its job. What I keep closer is the lesson I didn't know I needed. Boundaries are not cruelty. Self-worth is not arrogance. And justice doesn't require you to become hard. It only requires you to become clear. If you've ever been the quiet one in a loud family, if you've ever been underestimated until someone tried to take what was yours, tell me this. What boundary did you wish you'd set sooner? And if you want more stories where karma arrives through paperwork, truth, and earned peace, subscribe.